Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Haley. I am one of the assistant medical directors with Regents EMS. I am here with Dr. Okechukwu. She is one of our emergency medicine physicians at Regents.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was really excited when you reached out, so definitely excited to participate in this.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to start in on things and maybe have people get know a little bit more about you.
Sure.
And a little bit of your background and everything.
Yeah, so I am one of the newer hires, one of the ER docs. I finished residency at Regents last year. Before that, I went to med school in New York Medical College, and I grew up in Michigan. And just kind of left New York, came back to the Midwest, and yeah, here I am. It's been great.
Awesome. So kind of growing up and everything. So you grew up in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience for you growing up in Michigan? Again, Midwest,
Yeah.
fairly homogeneously Caucasian.
Yeah.
And kind of your route towards medicine and everything.
So truthfully, it was not dissimilar to my experience now. So lived in primarily white neighborhoods, but you just got used to it. So I was born in Nigeria. My family moved to the U.S. when I was 5. So that's like a stark change going from somewhere where everyone's black
Yes.
to somewhere where you're the only black kid in your class oftentimes. So initially it was like, oh, this is interesting. But then you just like get used to it, like when you go through, the entire school system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the case. And I think that this was long before I started thinking about some of these things, and you're just kind of living and you're a kid and you're not really like evaluating your day-to-day experience. You're just going to school and coming home. But in hindsight, I feel like there were a lot of ways that or at least I started trying to adapt myself to fit in better with my peers without realizing it even, I'm sure. And moving to New York was really cool because obviously it's a very diverse state, and you had just like a ton of representation of literally every nationality, everyone lives in New York.
Yes.
So it was much different. And I think that's when I started sort of noticing some of these things that had flown under the radar, like growing up in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, moving back here, it's been kind of going back the other way. But now I feel like I have much more of the like language to talk about some of these things and put words to what I was experiencing all those years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know how it was with you growing up in Michigan. Like you pretty much sounds like the only black kid around. And I mean, and you were young. So did you start school like with a bunch of the same kids and stuff and go through with them? Or do you feel like you were necessarily like accepted, or like they didn't necessarily say like, oh, it's the black kid because you grew up with them? Or was that...
So my family moved around quite a bit. So I was also the new kid a lot. So I was the new black kid often. So unfortunately, I didn't get that, I don't know, grandfather clause, I guess I'll call it, for people to be like, oh, I grew up with her. That's just Enyioma. But in certain ways, I don't know, I feel like it makes you stronger. I don't know. You learn to just like adapt to a lot of different situations, and just learn to be so fluid with, whatever's going on around you, just because so many pieces were changing often. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about comparing it because I'm adopted. So I grew up in a white home, in a white community.
Yeah.
Went to a very small school with a bunch of other white kids.
Yeah.
But was really myself and a couple other kids who were also adopted were the only representation that was not white within our entire school fairly. But kind of that grandfathered in. So I don't think I really thought about myself being Asian, being Korean, until I was out of high school, really, because as growing up, it was very much, it's Carrie, it's not Asian Carrie. I was more known to being like a teacher's kid than being my race. But I think once I stepped outside that little bubble where everyone knew me since we were growing up is when I really started thinking more and realizing more that maybe some interactions I thought maybe were not race-based, especially outside of my small town, were actually race-based and actually fairly racist.
Yeah. So like a moment of like, oh, people are treating me like...
Yeah. But instead of seeing Carrie, the person they grew up with, that they, as a human being, they see like an Asian woman, which was kind of my first experience. My first experience was getting outside my little small town bubble with that.
I can definitely relate to that. I think my moment of like there were like sprinklings, but my real moments of, well, people are like treating me like a Black woman, not like Enyioma or like, you know, who I like know myself to be. They're treating me like whatever stereotypes they have in their mind was probably in med school, because even though you had more representation in the like attendings and whatnot that were teaching, you still just felt like I was talking to one of my Black med classmates, and she was talking about how her hair was like a big deal. So she would wear her hair naturally sometimes, and natural African-American hair is really curly. You have the big afros, things like that. And she talked about how that was such a struggle for her. And me thinking back, I was like, when I was younger, I just started straightening my hair without even thinking about it. And it's like you move through all these years and you haven't even thought about why you're doing this until you're having a conversation with somebody who's like, oh, this is something I think about. This is something I struggle with, because, you know, there have been studies that show that people think that afros are less professional and things like that. And it's like, well, this is how it grew out of my head. Yeah,
this is my hair.
You know? And it wasn't until like some of those conversations in med school that I was like, interesting. Like there's so many ways in which I've just adapted myself without really thinking about it, and having other people like start verbalizing some of these things, and then you start picking up on maybe some of the other, like you said, things that you didn't think were perhaps race-based that definitely were in hindsight. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like right now this whole time, and like for me, the conversation about race has really brought up a lot of like self-reflection and my role in things. And I was reading an article the other day more about code switching. So that term meaning like adapting yourself to your general, you know, who you're interacting with and everything. And I think, and I know in my history, knowing a lot of other Korean adoptees, some Korean adoptees are more like me. I really very much embraced the fact that I was raised in a white culture by white parents. And I don't identify as much with like Korean heritage. But there's some adopted kids who definitely go the other way, and they like fully embrace Korean heritage. They move to Korea, they live in Korea, they learn the language efficiently. And that maybe that could have changed how people perceive me or where I've gone in my career even.
Absolutely.
Because if I had been more, I'm going to embrace more Korean mannerisms, Korean ways of thinking, talking, I don't know if I would have necessarily made the way that I am right now. Because I very much, like you say, embraced and just enveloped the white culture.
Right. And it's so like crazy when you step back and you start thinking about it. You're like, yeah, what if I had, you know, what if I had worn my hair naturally? Or what if I had, I don't even know other examples, but you know what I mean? Like, what if I had not adopted just this majority, I guess, representation, whether it's the way I present myself or the way that I speak or things like that, how my life would have been different. And you wonder if like you're a passable version of the minority. You know? And I don't know.
Do you feel in kind of going towards medical school and medicine in general, how you felt as a minority through going through medical school? Do you feel like there were any biases against you or for you, pro you, because of your race?
So there were definitely conversations that people would bring up about affirmative action. And in one specific instance, somebody was insinuating that I had gotten into medical school because I was Black. And aside from just being hurtful, I was like, you just feel the need to defend yourself in that moment. Like, actually,
Yes.
I'm smart, like I blah, 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 but that, like, there were some conversations that, and especially in light of, I think at that time, there was a lot going on with fewer Asian Americans being accepted to medical schools because there was the thought that there was, too much representation.
Yes.
So then the question is like, oh, is that fair? And blah, blah. And I don't know, but the general assumption automatically that I must have, been, I'm only present here because, people were trying to equal the score. I don't know.
Do you think that affected how you did in medical school or how you interacted with people, your peers, or even some of your mentors?
I think so. Like, I feel like I've always had this like nagging voice in the back of my head that feels the need to prove myself in a certain sense, feels the need to do well on whatever it is that I'm working on, or just perform at a high level just to kind of prove like, hey, no, I actually belong here. And you realize the ways that you've just internalized some of those assumptions that you think other people have about you. And I'm positive it's not everybody, of course, that thinks that, but just being exposed to that early in training, you're like, whoa, like, is everyone thinking that I'm only here because of that reason? Like, okay, well, I guess I should study extra hard, or I should, really prove myself in this way. And I don't think that's healthy for many reasons.
Yeah, no, I think that in general, like, minorities, probably a general statement, but probably feel that way once they've gone into academic kind of situations. I know even medical, not so much for me, but for like college, I really felt that I needed to prove my way, that I belong there. I was in I originally was going into engineering, so I was with a bunch of engineering people and felt very much the need to say like, oh, I belong here. Yeah. Ultimately, change majors went the direction and everything, but just that I can understand that nagging or that voice at the back of your head that probably is not healthy, and maybe other people have it too. Absolutely. For other reasons and everything, but to have it driven by race is something that is I think probably a little different.
Absolutely. It adds an extra layer. It's definitely related to imposter syndrome, which is the way that I've like conceptualized other people dealing with similar feelings. So whether it is you being a woman and of course men, experience imposter syndrome too. But just the idea, do I belong here? Did I earn my way here? Am I a fraud? To add the race part as an extra layer on top of it when you're already dealing with the woman, the gender part. Yeah, exactly. It's like, ooh, a lady doctor. Like, it just adds like another layer to it. That I don't know. I feel like it's taken me a lot of, especially in my first year out as an attending, it's taken me a lot of like reflecting and mindfulness to intentionally start trying to overcome some of these thoughts. Because I think we all have those voices within ourselves, but then to internalize the voices of others or the assumptions of others too, just like creates this like state of doubt where you're like, I'm already doubtful because this is a difficult job and there's a lot at stake with almost every single decision you make. But then also like the idea that maybe people aren't confident in your skills as a provider.
Because they see you walk in as a Black female.
Exactly.
And automatically they don't have the same level of trust or level of just relatability to you. So they just don't inherently say like, yeah, they know what they're doing.
Exactly. So it's been an interesting first year out. It's been good. It's been a good year, but that's definitely one of the things that I've aside from just the medical, part of things that I've had to work on, for my own sake and my own, I guess, mental health.
Yes, absolutely.
Reasons,
Do you feel going through when you started kind of doing more like patient encounters and your rotations through med school and then residency, do you feel that there was definitely a difference from your either female white or male colleagues, that the patients, in terms of how they interacted with you or how they treated you?
Yeah. So on the positive side of that, I found, so a lot of the hospitals I rotated at in New York City, one was in East Harlem, so it was overwhelmingly minority, so Hispanic, African American, and I found that it felt like I had a warmer reception from the Black population. And I feel like what was kind of protective was the fact that we were all trainees, like
Yes.
medical students. So people just assume you have no idea what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So no one is really treating my white medical student counterparts that much better, because they're just like,
You're still just
where's the real doctor?
You're still just a medical
Yeah,
student.
exactly. So I feel like that was protective in a sense, but I did find that I had better rapport with some of the Black patients that I had. Like, some would be like, oh, you look just like my granddaughter. I'm like, cool. Sounds good. Like, this seems like a plus here. Luckily, no, I have not been in a situation where I've had any like direct like racial slurs or racial exclusion in a very like explicit sense. Like, I've heard stories of like people saying like, oh, I don't want that person coming into my room, and luckily I haven't experienced that. That would make me so sad.
Yes, I know.
But I've certainly heard those stories, and I don't know, it really is saddening.
Yeah, I know a lot of our firefighter kind of colleagues in the pre-hospital setting have mentioned that they've been, kicked out of homes, been thrown a lot of racial slurs. I think that we are fortunate as physicians that we introduce ourselves as physicians. And I think that luckily for us, we may have a little different, just people feel a little bit different on what they can say to us and how they can treat us.
Yeah.
I think that our pre-hospital colleagues may have it a little more intensely, especially because they're in their homes, they're not in their own safe environment.
Right.
And I think that's definitely something, like we as minority physicians can do to support our pre-hospital colleagues who may experience things, because I think we are lucky. I think, there are physicians who do experience it for sure. I've heard lots of stories about it, but I think we do come from a little bit different angle where people are like, oh, it's the doctor. They may question it every once in a while, like, where's my doctor? Where's my doctor been here?
Right.
But ultimately, when you reinforce that you are the physician taking care of them, then it's generally, oh, okay, you're my doctor.
Yeah.
I too have not really I've experienced a few just drunken racial slurs, but nothing like maliciously intended, directed, like, I don't want you in my room.
Yeah.
Leave me alone sort of thing. It's just more like, I'm a drunk person and I'm being a jerk.
Yeah. The closest I've gotten was a patient in Wisconsin who told me that he was okay with me taking care of him even though I was Black.
Yes.
And I was like, okay.
I'm glad you're okay with it.
Thanks for sharing. I don't know what to do with that. It's just so interesting, though, too, with the pre-hospital side, because at the end of the day, the patient is seeking help.
Yeah.
So it's just, I've never understood that. And I think trying to understand racism is a like fruitless task, but it's just like, you called us. Yep. We didn't find you.
Yep. You called 911. We came.
Exactly.
I am fully capable of taking care of you.
Exactly. And you're going to ask me to leave your home, so do you want help or no?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't understand it, but like I said, I don't think it's logically based.
No, I don't. And I don't think it's something that we'll probably ever fully get understanding of where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And everything. The things that, I don't know if you've experienced this too, especially working in more rural Western Wisconsin settings like me. Sometimes I feel like kind of those comments, even though they're not maliciously racist, they are definitely still racist.
Absolutely.
I've gotten the just random comments of like, oh, I can use chopsticks. Like, oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use chopsticks. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Or as an Asian person, a lot of times the question will be like, where did you come from? Or what are you? Yeah. Which are, like, I know what they're trying to ask, but it's not necessarily the correct way of saying it, I would say. Like, if you want to know my ethnic background, by all means, I will let you know. But asking me where I came from, and when I answer Minnesota, and you don't accept that answer, we're not going anywhere. But I don't know if you've experienced any other, just more like this, just the subtle things that aren't necessarily blatantly racist. And I think that kind of goes back to, this conversation about racism and how just because you're not saying horrible things or you're not enacting horrible acts does not mean that you're not racist.
I think my name is like the biggest like elephant in the room oftentimes, because people will ask that question like, oh, where are you from because of my name? And sometimes like if I'm not in the mood, I'm like, Michigan. They're like, okay. I'm like, yeah, Michigan was cool. Why do you ask?
Yes.
And people, so some people are earnestly like, how do I pronounce your name? I'm really working at this. And some people, like I've had an experience where a woman asked me my name. I told her and she was like, oh, how did you ever learn how to spell that when you were a kid? And I was like, I don't even know how to begin answering your question, because how do all children learn how to spell their names? And you realize that English is not the language around the world, right? Like, how do people who don't, or like languages that don't even use like English letters learn how to spell their names? What is your larger question? So I've had situations like that, and I feel like my name is the instance in which it comes up most often. But like you said, I feel like there is a little bit of like a protective cover provided by being the physician, that I think that people do try to at least, okay, please tell me again, how do I say your name correctly? Like, I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, and I appreciate it. And it feels like, I don't know, maybe it is the physician side. Maybe it's just, good people who want to, make sure that I feel, included or whatever. But I have noticed that there's two different reactions when I say my name. Like, some people are like, oh, I'll never get that. And then some people are like, oh, okay, can you say it one more time? I really want to, figure out how to say this correctly.
Yeah.
So.
And I think in general, I've actually been fairly happy about how, especially in like very white communities, I feel like that's kind of looking towards progress, thinking about going forward. I feel that, in general, people are not that the mean, cutthroat kind of reaction, but it's more some interest or disinterest. And that I think that is a great place to start moving forward from. What are ways that you think that we as physicians can help our pre-hospital colleagues, or really anyone within medicine, like the HUCs, the techs, the nurses, the respiratory therapists, everyone who's involved in healthcare who may not be white? How can we help as kind of the leaders of the pack or the leaders of medicine to promote diversity? And really the biggest thing is promote inclusion.
I think so in residency, I don't remember which attending, but one of the attendings said that he views being the emergency physician on a team as you are essentially responsible for all the things that happen, when, let's say this is your shift. So a patient comes in and they're disrespecting your staff. It is your responsibility to stand up for your staff, realizing that you're the person with the most power in that room and the most power in that situation. And I think that is like a huge, I haven't witnessed a patient attacking pre-hospital staff, but again, I work in Wisconsin and all the pre-hospital staff is all white. So
pretty much, yes.
I haven't experienced that, but I've definitely experienced like patients, attacking the nurses, like attacking the techs, things like that. And I always try to make a point to be like, no, like I specifically will not stand for this, just because if you're not like taking that stand as the physician, if you're kind of like maybe like, oh, I don't want to get involved, or I don't want to, make this like a bigger thing. I think that you're just kind of leaving some of your colleagues out to dry. So I think that would be one big way, just like making a point to be like, if I ever see this, like I'm going to say something, and it's going to now be a problem between me and the person who's doing it, and kind of removing the pre-hospital or whomever it is that's being attacked in that way from it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge things that lots of people, from kind of doing a couple of these talks and like talking with other personnel, just saying, even if it is awkward, even if you don't think that it's something that you have traditionally done, but and it's not embarrassing, like please speak up. Like
absolutely,
it makes a huge difference for the person who's receiving the abuse.
Yeah.
And it also, I think, really sets a precedent for the patient.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, if you can get a large group of people to do the same thing, so like our entire physician group, it can create a culture then within our department that is inclusive, because we can be diverse. I think it was one of the Chief Makoso, he was talking about you can be diverse, but you need to have that inclusivity portion of things. And I think we still are working on the diversity portion, but I think we can definitely still work on the inclusion portion of things. So making people who don't look the same or don't act the same or don't practice the same way feel like they're part of the team or the group.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, stepping back as well, I think it would be beneficial for just emergency medicine as well, like whether you are a minority or not, because I think taking an active role in setting boundaries for acceptable behavior will just be beneficial, because all of us have experienced a situation in which, some patient is being inappropriate or being extremely demanding or belittling or something, even outside of the context of race or, gender, or they're just, some patients who are like, this is what I'm going to get. This is, the way that I'm going to do it. And medicine is not a service in that way. It's not like a concierge, like you order up, like, I'm going to get this and this and this. And I think that people just getting comfortable kind of, setting some of those boundaries, including the inclusivity part. And, this is how we're not going to treat our, staff and colleagues and things like that, just kind of sets the tone of like, this is a respectful environment. Yep. Like we will all respect each other. And it will just be like a mutually, I don't know the word, but just like a more positive environment in general.
Patients can feel comfortable.
Exactly.
They can feel like they're going to be respected.
Absolutely.
Like we will respect you as the patient, but you need to also respect everyone else who's taking care of you.
Exactly.
From the physician to the person who registers you.
Exactly.
Everyone needs to be respected.
Exactly. Like there's a baseline of respect that we're all going to abide or live above. Yes. And I think it's just like beneficial for everybody in general.
Yeah. And I think, especially with our specialty in emergency medicine and, our pre-hospital colleagues who bring the patients to the emergency department, that we just serve such a diverse population. We see everyone and anyone.
Yeah.
We see people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
So diversity in terms of not just race or gender, but, religion or political sphere or just really, sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Everybody comes to the emergency department.
Absolutely.
So knowing, and I really like that, just making that mutual respect for everybody. And I think it's so important for our specialty because of that reason, because we see everyone and anyone.
Exactly.
Talking about like moving forward and as being leaders within emergency medicine and medicine in general, thinking about the ways that we can really help our specialty, help our colleagues become more inclusive, become more of a diverse specialty, and really, especially to, how we treat our patients and how we can do things that are good for everyone.
Yeah. Like to the benefit of both the providers and the patients.
Yeah.
That baseline of respect, like mutual respect that we were talking about. I don't know. And I think just having more of these conversations is so important. I feel like, some of the things we've been talking about is that, now is the time that a lot of these things are at the forefront, but even 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half, that we're still, just addressing some of these things head on, even when they're uncomfortable. And in the residency, I think that they have started including a lot more like bias work and, you know, what are your internalized biases and things like that. And we all have them. And even work like that where you're starting to think about the way that you think, I think is helpful in just like moving things forward overall.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think that the things that we do now is making it okay to talk about these things and making it okay to bring up race. And even if it's positive or negative, I mean, we need to talk about it and we need to measure it and we need to look at outcomes based on it. We need to do all of these things. And I think some of the biggest hurdle actually, I feel like, is like we can look at the metrics, we can look at data. I think the biggest thing that is difficult for a lot of people is doing the talking.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to talking about race at all.
It's uncomfortable.
Like how many people have you shared your story with and your experiences as a Black woman in medicine? I mean, I personally can say that I have not shared my story and my experiences with a lot of people until really in the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, my close friends and things like that. But I definitely didn't. And like, even in residency where you do develop camaraderie with, you know, your co-residents, crossing that line to go and be like, oh, like, here's this crazy thing that happened to me. And I think it was because I'm a Black woman, you know, like it's weird, you know, and I never got to that level of comfort in that space. So yeah, I've tried to be more mindful of it of late though, and just saying the things. And even with my most recent, like yearly review or whatever that I had with Marty, telling him the story about the patient, you know, telling me that he was okay with me taking care of him even though I was Black. And like, that wasn't that didn't hurt my feelings, but I'm like, these things should be talked about. Like, this is, you know, something that should be said out loud and, you know, like addressed head on.
I think so too. And especially like thinking about leadership and even us as physicians, our leadership and our administration, you know, they don't know what's happening unless we tell them if they are not experiencing it. So I think although it does, we kind of talked about this too with the pre-hospital personnel, although it does put the burden on the people who are experiencing it to tell their story, to maybe make recommendations and suggestions. I think that it's kind of part of the process, unfortunately, that we have to do that burden, because otherwise people who don't experience this just don't know. It's not anything that they've experienced. It's not anything that how can they be aware of it if we don't tell them? And then learning the lessons from ourselves and our self-reflection and making suggestions to go forward, because they have no reference to be able to make suggestions themselves necessarily. Right. Other than, you know, reading some literature that other people have done, but it's hard. It's hard to do that, and I think it's easier if you have someone you know to be able to kind of tell you the story, tell you their experience, and then maybe make some recommendations for how we can move forward, and then taking it from there. And then I think the responsibility can shift. Where now you know these things, now you have heard these stories. Now you've heard these recommendations. Now it's your responsibility to maybe move even further and more forward with it, because now you know. You can't play that you're ignorant anymore. Like you don't know, but now you do. And now it's in your responsibility. And that's what my hope is for doing a lot of these, is like, hey, let's get the conversation started. Let's keep things moving forward. And now that people are listening and hearing, you can't say that you didn't know anymore. Like now you know, so now there's some responsibility that lies with you to continue things and put it in a way that is now making the policies, making the laws, making the rules.
Absolutely. And I think that requires just a level of being receptive. And I'm sure a lot of it will require everyone setting, you know, quite a bit of ego aside, and not even ego in the sense that, like, you know, you have a big head, but like ego in the, like, no, I'm a good person, you know, like, you know, I would never do this. Like, okay, well, no one's calling you a bad person. But here is something that's happening. And just being receptive that this is the experience that some people are experiencing, and being like, okay, how do we figure this out together? You know, that level of reception of, okay, I hear you. Like, what do we do? You know, where do we go from here?
And then really, I think the big two key piece would be like that internalization of it, like not like that sounds good, like actually like processing what they're saying and thinking about like, oh, how would I feel if someone did that to me when I was practicing, or how would I feel if I met that barrier over and over again, and trying to understand again just basic human things of walking in someone else's shoes, seeing where they're coming from, and maybe I can understand their anger, I can understand their frustrations now, and here's things that I think we can do to help move it.
For sure.
Move it away from that, or try to get some of the structural things dismantled that have promoted racism.
For sure.
Over and over again.
For sure. I think that like everyone has problems. Like that is a fact of life. Like life is hard for literally everyone.
No one is problem free.
That's what you learn once you become an adult. You're like, oh, everyone's struggling. Okay, sounds good. So it's hard to like then take on the burden of another person onto your plate when you're like, I have, kids, I have a family, I have this stressful job, I have this. Now you want me to, like take on your problem too. But I think that for the just benefit of society, just like a little bit at a time, like whatever it is that you can do to be like, I recognize I'm struggling, but maybe in this way you're struggling more, or in a different way. And if there's something that I can do or be involved in the solution part of things, I think everyone will benefit.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not necessarily meaning to say like, well, you need to do more, but it's more just saying you need to recognize my struggles. And now that you know about them, like, I guess you can choose to ignore them, that's fine. But like if you want to help and say you want to help and want to move things forward, then you do have to take a little bit on your plate from it.
For sure.
In your own way. Because I think that's another big thing I was reading about too, a lot of this movement of don't feel bad if you're not out at the protest. Don't feel bad if you're not doing all these other things. Like you don't have to.
That is not everyone.
That's not what everyone should be doing or what they're comfortable doing. But if you can make small changes in your life, like even if it's internal and you're not saying things out loud, but you're maybe changing how you think about things, or you hear a story and instead of reacting gutturally and being like, oh, that is totally, or they're just a criminal. When we think about like a black person getting shot, they're just a criminal. Like think about, okay, wait, let's think about maybe where they came from. Let's think about their situation. And let's think about what put them there, and think about more of the societal things. And you don't have to do anything about it, but I think at least thinking about it, for some people, if they can do that, I think that's a huge step forward.
Yeah, just like the understanding that none of these things developed in a vacuum.
Yes.
And it's all cause and effect. This is a direct effect of, maybe these factors, like we were talking about, that have been brewing. And I don't know, it's easy to just point fingers and place blame, especially when you're highly emotional. But I don't know.
I think I'm hopeful that starting these conversations and starting being open and being more willing to share stories will just provide some education, provide some reference points for people to do with what they wish to do. But hopefully also part of that will be contributing to moving forward.
For sure. And that's why when you reached out to me, that's why I was interested in participating. I haven't done anything else like this. And in the vein of thinking about like everyone has their own problems, and you think about your own life and you're like, do I really like want to get out there and start, leading this cause? I have my own life. I have things that I'm a fresh attending who's learning how to like practice on my own in the middle of a pandemic. Like there's already a ton on my plate, and it's easy to like crawl into a shell. And I think when initially a lot of this started, that was my initial instinct. Just like, okay, like I have so much that I'm dealing with. But once the dust kind of settles and you're like, okay, what would be beneficial in terms of helping things move forward? Okay, if I can share my experience and that's at all helpful, I can do that at the very least. So I was definitely like interested in.
Yeah, that's how I've kind of felt in general. Just maybe I've had conversations amongst friends, amongst my family. We've talked about things, but like I've never really been super vocal about my thoughts on things in terms of diversity, inclusion, racism. But after the George Floyd murder and kind of what kind of sparked from that, I just felt that like it's time. Like I have a position where I am privileged to have a leadership position within society, even that now is a good time, and it's not necessarily like I'm willing to be vulnerable and I'm willing to put my story and my words out there now, because I think that it will help. I'm hopeful at least that it will help make some sort of change, whether or not it's big or small, I don't know, but
for
something.
Sure. And that being hopeful, because I feel the same way, that being hopeful I feel like is why I want to start maybe participating in some of these things, because I feel like initially it's like, oh, you're kind of hopeless, like you're like, oh, how are we ever going to get out of this mess, like this is such a mess. But I feel like I've refound that, like, okay, there's a way out of this, we just have to there is some work that needs to be done. Everyone has to just be willing to do their part, whatever that is.
And I think even just hearing positive feedback from colleagues, from other people, really pushed me into that hopeful, because like it made me again like believe in the general good of people. And that if they learn things and they hear things that maybe they just give them that benefit of the doubt. They maybe didn't have the education, didn't have the life experiences, and when they learn about them, that they will be also motivated to make some changes within their life.
For sure. And even health partners make, like Andrea Walsh making a statement. Was massive. Like, this is how this is where the organization stands. Like, even something like that. Like, I read the statement, and you read so many statements that are so, like, appeasing. Like, just like, let's just say just enough. But like, I felt like her statement was like, no, this is where Health Partners stands. We recognize this as a problem. And as an organization, we want to, move forward in these ways. It felt encouraging. I was like, wow, okay, cool. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think as far as from my standpoint, I think I'm don't have much else other than unless you have like a very pressing story that you definitely still want to share. But thank you so much for being here today. I think that us being as physicians and being open and being candid will hopefully help other people be able to feel brave about coming forward too, because it's hard. It's not in my comfort zone at all to do these type of things. But I think that hopefully doing this will help other people understand more or feel that they can tell their story as well. Sure. We can continue to learn more from other people's perspectives and being receptive to that.
For sure. And thank you for having me. I can come back anytime.
Perfect.
So just let me know. This is fun.